Welcome back to Love Wrestling. Spencer Love here with not only a great pro wrestler, but let's get real here, friends. A Canadian icon, both in name, in spirit, and in professional wrestling training as of this point. Johnny Devine joining me, a guy who I've looked up to for, let's get real, a long time. Again, I can't stress enough, a guy who has impacted Canadian pro wrestling in so many ways, and that continues with the Canadian Strong Style Wrestling Academy. We're going to get into all of it, man, but before we do that, how are you doing on this fine day as the world starts to get a little bit back to normal?
Well, I'm better and better as the normality returns. Excited to be starting a new business and excited to dipping my toes, as it were, back into the waters of Western Canadian wrestling some more.
Absolutely, man. Like I was telling you before we started recording, the first chance I got to see you wrestle live was with the CWE a couple of years ago, but you're getting back into the ring as a trainer and as a wrestler. Let's talk about Can-Am first, because their return has been absolutely great and they're going to continue to do great things. So maybe just take me through the process of getting reintegrated with what's, a pretty integral Western Canadian wrestling promotion.
Well, Can-Am Wrestling and my relationship goes back 20 years. I think it was 98 or 99 when I started doing shows for them. And they have resurrected this last year, just ran a great show that had somewhere between 450 and 500 people at it. It was very highly received and it was a lot of fun. And now they've just announced a return to their home base, which was the wonderful Back Alley Bar in Calgary, where they'll be doing bi-weekly Wednesday nights at the Alley again, which if you go back 20 years, they were some of the most fun shows, and like the atmosphere and the ambiance there is fabulous. It's probably going to be where we film a YouTube television show and a number of other things. And it's going to be a lot of fun. So I'm looking forward to working with that crew.
Now, of course, there are a lot of great people involved with Can-Am, but I've had Steve Rivers on the show before, and I would be remiss if I didn't ask if you had any good Steve Rivers stories, because I know you've probably got exactly, right? So hopefully you can deliver a great story on, again, another guy who's had a huge impact on the Canadian wrestling scene.
So my I love Rivers. Rivers and I go back 20 years, and one of my favorite Rivers memories right now is actually one of my most recent ones, where Rivers and I like to catch up with each other at Cauliflower Alley Club in Las Vegas quite often. Mm-hmm. And in 2016, something like that, I think it was, I was in what they call the Cauliflower Alley Cup. Okay. And I won the Cauliflower Alley Cup that night after beating the Tokyo Monster Kahagas, who's a former NWA world champion. And when the show started, there was probably 450 people, maybe 500 people in this. It's like a ballroom in Vegas hotel and casino. Mm-hmm. And somewhere around the midway point of the second battle royal or something like that, Scott Hall came in the room, and the room ended up half clearing out after that. And so by the main event, where the Canadians going over for the first time ever at the Cauliflower Alley, there's maybe 75 to 100 people left in the room, and half of them are just absolutely obliterated Canadian guys who went out at the beginning of the show and hit the dollar beers down on the strip and all of that kind of good stuff, and have just made it back by the main event. So boom, I have the shit kicked out of me by Kahagas, but end up pulling out this win, and I'm getting my hand raised, and all of a sudden I turn around and there's 5 guys in the ring, and Rivers picks me up. Fucking down a hot shot, where to go, boy? And he's bouncing me around, and I'm like, please stop, Steve. You're killing me. I'm already broken. And it was,
I was gonna say, my everything hurts.
yeah. It was so fun and so hilarious. And I love it. There were a lot of really, really great road times with that crew back in the day. So I'm hoping we can recreate some magic.
Well, I don't need to vouch to you what a great individual he is, and obviously being a great professional wrestler as well, right? But
Yes.
on your end specifically, over the last few years, at least COVID notwithstanding, right? As a fan of professional wrestling in Alberta, like this really seems to be the most active you've been, at least in this province in Western Canada over the last little bit. You did a couple of interviews a few years ago where you said you were taking selective bookings. So are they just much more appealing selective bookings? Have you made a decision to like, I would like to wrestle more and be a little less selective, or what's been the process there?
I stepped back for a while because, 23 years in the business now, everybody's, fire comes and goes. Sometimes it's down to nothing. So after a point, I lost my enjoyment. Like I absolutely loathe the WWE product. While I'm such a huge fan of so many of the guys, what I actually despise is their production. Oops, as I shake my camera, where they shake their camera and do quick cuts and do all of these ridiculous overproducing things that miss integral parts of matches. Like they miss some of the biggest bumps guys take constantly to shoot absolutely garbage shots of the announce team, or the garbage shot of the television or the garbage shot of the crowd reaction that isn't even reacting to the bump yet. You got to show them the bump first, then the reaction, not the reaction before the thing, because then you're wasting what the guy is doing. And it happens so much that I can't watch it, because it infuriates me as a guy who understands like how the psychology of those camera shots should work. So when you start to think about the other products out there, there was like a downturn, but then AEW came along and put some spice back into the mix. And now you have this open door policy where you've got all of these companies working together, and that is utopia. Like you've got the ability for guys to go make names for themselves in all different places and things, and then like it's a great time for wrestling. And for me as a fan watching again, I got more interested in Ring of Honor products and Impact products, in MLW, which is putting out some great
unbelievable stuff,
right? Like and just starting to pick up my following of New Japan again, my following of Noah, my following of what All Japan has. And like I had let it go so long that I'm not remiss, but I mean, like I took time off on purpose. Now I'm coming at it with a fresher set of eyes, if that makes sense. Like, I'm old and I've been around a while, but now from a fresher sense of, I don't know exactly who which characters are to begin with, because I wasn't their indie fan. But now as I see these guys on TV, I say, okay, there's the upside of this guy, there's the downside of that guy. Excuse me. The business now is giving more opportunities than ever before. So it's a wonderful time. Like as we explained to all of our students, right? It's cyclical, the business, right? It's up, it's down, it's up, it's down, it's this, it's that. It's all based off of WWE. Nah, horseshit. It's based off of fan interaction. And as fan interaction starts to go back up, which it has now because COVID is over and everybody wants to be live at shows, because you can't go and interact with a movie. You can't go and yell racial slurs at actors on Broadway. Right? You can only do that at live professional wrestling, where like that's the only interactive theater left going that way. Well, there is interactive theater that does cover it, but it's obviously not to the same
extent.
Ain't
the same. You ain't watching anybody.
It's not a it's not a multi-billion-dollar business, I tell you that.
Exactly.
So now now's the time, now's the opportunity, strike while the iron's hot kind of stuff. So it's no better time to pick up the pace.
I can't remember the individual's name in Happy Gilmore, but it's like a carousel happy. It goes up and down and around. And that's exactly what it seems to be happening in the
Yeah.
professional wrestling sense, right?
That's-
Again, I wasn't a huge fan at the time, admittedly, but you look at Attitude Era and the New Generation or whatever they called it, and the CM Punk era, and you sort of ride those waves, right? And like you mentioned, getting back in the ring obviously is one thing, but you mentioned your students and getting them into the ring and passing on what you're doing. And I know you've done some training before. Obviously, some is vastly understating that work, but maybe what is it about the Canadian Strong Style Wrestling Academy that differentiates it, or what do you think makes this a more unique training experience than maybe even you've offered before?
Well, that's actually a great question, because there's styles. Okay, so much like martial arts, kung fu, right? Mantis, monkey, tiger, crane. When you think Memphis, that's Southern style. When you think Florida, that's a Florida style. When you think Texas, they have a style. Japan, Mexico, the East Coast, everybody's got a different style. Historically, and I'm not going to list names because some of them aren't politically correct anymore, but the absolute greatest wrestlers in the world ever came from Calgary. And they came from a very specific style of wrestling. And that is the Canadian Strong Style. It's a hybrid mix of lucha libre influences, Japanese strong style and puroresu influences, British catch wrestling and chain wrestling influences, anything and everything from everywhere that can lend to a better performance art. It was mixed in the pot here.
Yeah.
And they came from everywhere specifically to learn this hybrid style here. And then the style itself here, thanks to Stu Hart, was a very traditional and protective, slower style than a lot of people give it credit for, till Dynamite came along and everything changed like that. But when you think in terms of work, even Bad News Allen, Bret, right? They were methodical, technical bruisers who could brawl, who could technical lock and do whatever, but it could also take risks off the top rope and do, the stuff when it called for it. And that was part of like what poo-pooed Bret on people after a time, was because he made so much sense that he would turn down stupid stuff. Look what happened to Owen, rest his soul, my hero. And he would turn down these, stupid bumps, and guys like Michaels would be like, why won't you take a bump off the cage? Like, because I don't have to.
Yeah. Don't have to, doesn't make sense in the context of it.
But that kind of thing, like, that's where the new school, old school attitude clashes come in, when it's like, if the new school guys, which I am a huge fan of guys like Orange Cassidy and stuff like that, if you can mix the two and be believable, you've got the formula. But if you can't do both, if you can only do the new school stuff, well, your one trick pony gets old after you've done your 6th Canadian Destroyer.
Yeah. That's a very good way to put it, man. And I think it answers the next question I was going to ask you. But like, everybody talks about the Bret versus Shawn debate. And when you come to Albertans, everybody knows Bret's better. So it turns into the Bret versus Owen debate. And I've obviously heard you before reference Owen, right? So what was it that drew you to him maybe versus Bret? I know you've obviously paid homage to Bret more than enough, but you're an Owen guy.
Don't get me wrong. 9.99 for Bret.
Exactly.
Owen's a 10. Right. And only because he was shorter. So to me, as a short guy, right, like I know and knew there was no Daniel Bryan's when I was around.
Yeah.
Right? And Daniel Bryan and I were at the same time. Like, I could have technically been a Daniel Bryan if I had a William Regal. That said, we're Owen and Bret put on the same poster, like I'm cheering for both of them equally kind of thing. But preferentially to me, I leaned toward Owen more because to me, he was always a better underdog. And that came down to him always being smaller than guys like Mukat Singh and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I could get more invested in him as a character based on his, like, same thing with Dynamite. I adored him because he was 5'8", right?
Yeah.
Which I'm that guy.
I was going to say, as cliche as it sometimes sounds to say, but like, he's someone you could sort of envision yourself being, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that was exactly it. They were the physical role models that I aspired to.
Now then, it might be an easy answer given that, but are you a WrestleMania guy or a SummerSlam guy, given the two great matches the brothers had? Because again, it's no wrong answer.
I'll be honest. I am a Bret and Davey at Wembley Stadium guy. That's
all right. Again, a third non-wrong answer.
That's my jam. Like that.
It's damn good.
Exactly.
You're asking, good.
Would you like the jewels with the cup or the jewels with the saucer?
You're gonna win regardless. It's just a matter of picking your preference, right? But it's all wrong with any of that. Absolutely, man. Now, of course, if we're talking about great Canadian professional wrestlers, whether it's Owen, Davey, Bret, or the individual I'm about to bring up, you've got to throw Josh Alexander in that conversation at this point, right? So, like, number one, obviously, talk about your relationship with him, because you coined the phrase, but he has lived the phrase as well of Canadian strong style. But just the impact he's making on Canadian wrestling now.
Well, and he is the exact prime example of what Canadian strong style is all about, because legitimately, when you can do everything, you can work with anyone and make it believable and make it interesting and make it something that suspends even for a moment your disbelief at least once or twice in a match, where you're just like, oh my God, like, what's going on?
How the hell did he do that?
Like, come on, seriously? Are you kidding me? These are things I hear regularly, which that's the point, right? That is the exact desired effect of what we work for, what we train for. Like, Bruce Lee said it best, fear not the man who knows 1,000 kicks, fear the man who knows one kick and practices it 10,000 times a day. Josh Alexander is to a master's level. Like, if you thought in terms of education, he is now at a master's level education in the professional wrestling side of wrestling. And like, there isn't a human alive that he can't pull probably one of the best matches you've ever seen out of. And that is a testament to Josh pulling gold out of anyone. Right.
That guy could wrestle a 2x4 and I would definitely pay for it on pay-per-view if they gave her the proper promotion, to throw a lot of P's in one sentence there. But again, and I'm going to pivot a little bit here because it lets me get a fan question in, and it lets me transition to the early days of the dungeon. This one from Duke Durango. What sparked you to join the military?
Well, being poor, first of all. So
that might do it.
Going to college in the States, throwing my money in the toilet, I was like, yeah, this is not for me. But a little bit of service, a little bit of education through the service, well, absolutely. And I was a cadet growing up. My grandfather was World War II Air Force, and there's a lot of my growing up had to do with discipline, respect, that kind of stuff within the framework of sports, within the framework of martial arts, within the framework of being a cadet, that kind of stuff. So the soldier mentality was bred into me early. And then it just became a foregone conclusion after a point at college where my best friend and I joined, and my best friend at the time, joined together, and then ended up also becoming professional wrestlers together, because those were both kind of dreams for both of us at the same time.
Yeah.
So it was kind of like the timing's right on this. Oh, we're doing it together. That's awesome. Yes. And as I was getting out of the military, with a month left in, I decided not to sign a second contract. With a month left, I went to the Spring Stampede show at the Corral and met the Hearts, and the rest is history.
And like the simpatico, or like sort of the serendipity of life, right? Like it feels like when you have that as your background and you have the very disciplined, regimented life, like there ain't going to be a better place for you to get trained than the Heart Dungeon, hey?
Well, that's like, there is literally like an energy manifestation. When you put your energy towards it, you can manifest anything you want with just simply repetitive positive thought about it. And once I was going, there was, to me, there was no stopping me, because I was a voracious sponge for information and knowledge, and I would learn from anyone. And it got me heat a lot with the Hearts, that I went and worked with other companies when they wanted me to be exclusive, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, there was no getting out of Alberta or Western Canada without expanding those horizons.
Yeah, I was going to say, again, to pivot a bit before we get back to the Dungeon and Duke and all of those sorts of guys, what are your feelings on that? Because Alberta and to a lesser degree, but still to a degree, BC, you still see that. And hey, if you're working for promotion A, you're not working for promotion B, C, or XYZ. So there are definitely merits to both sides of it. But the opinion of yours from someone more qualified than I.
Well, okay. So each company is going to have its core roster of guys, and the downfall of the business, and this is not directed at any companies that I know or work for, but all of them at the same time, because everything in Western Canada is all running small fry business models. Okay. Mm-hmm. Nobody's drawing 1,000 a show. Nobody is doing good business. Okay. Nobody. So within the scope of all of these small fry promotions, they all want to try to protect what is their little slice of the small pie. Mm-hmm. But within the framework of Western Canada, there are always going to be 10 standout guys. Doesn't matter from where, BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, but everything west of the Great Lakes is an entity unto itself. And so thus, within that framework, you have 10 guys who have the ability to travel interpromotionally. Whether or not they understand that they should, and whether or not that they are willing to take the necessary risks and or sacrifices to do so to better their career, is the other two, speed bumps in the road.
The variables to it.
Right? Because after a point, the only way to get out of here is to get your name big enough that somebody over there notices it.
Mm-hmm.
Period.
Very fair point.
Period. So the only way to do that is to work with people doing big enough things to make a ripple in the pond.
Yeah, and maybe, obviously you have your tryouts with WWE, you're a former X Division champion. I don't need to speak to that sort of stuff, but you work with TJ and Harry and Ted and Jack Evans and the great individuals coming out of Alberta at that time. Is that maybe what started to get people's eyes on you? Because again, I wasn't watching a ton back then, so it's a lot of speculation, but it seems like it was a pretty special time, at least as far as an outsider's perspective.
Well, and that's, I was a little ahead of them actually. So I left before they hit.
Okay. Makes sense.
So I had a bunch of different tryouts and was given we just bought WCW. So we've got 100 guys and 5 long blonde haired guys, 200 pounds. Okay. So that made sense. So I was like, okay. So I went to not Ring of Honor, excuse me. I went to ECW just before it folded, and was hired by Heyman and Tommy, and they folded 2 or 3 months later. So I was like, oh, okay, option C, and option C was Don Callis at the time and what he had going with TNA and stuff. So that's how that ended up there, is I was already worked my way up Don's card to a point where I was main eventing Don's shows. And I opened the shows, with guys like Kenny Omega. So like,
Yeah.
that's like your name is in that mix there at the same time, doing the same things. I just my knowledge and thought was like, to get anywhere, I got to be further east. So then it was Nashville first, but then Windsor and Toronto and Windsor and
Yeah. Like the Johnny Cash of professional wrestling, you've been everywhere, man, at this point, right? And
you got to go where the business is. And like the sad reality is unless you're AJ Styles or Samoa Joe or a name like that, they ain't flying you from Calgary or Edmonton or Vancouver or anywhere if you're not worth the flight.
Yeah. Now, you've touched on it in other podcasts before, but I have to ask, man, you've talked about AJ Styles being not only a great pro wrestler, but a hell of a shooter and obviously a hell of a guy too. So maybe a little bit on that end of things, because like, again, great pro wrestler, but you don't hear a lot of like AJ Styles legitimately tapped me out in the most complimentary way I can put it,
And that's AJ was a great athlete, like scale of 1 to 10 athletes.
Yeah,
he's man. A 9.98. Do you know what I mean? Like he could only stand to be a little taller and then he'd be a 10.
Yeah.
But he was also a really, really accomplished amateur wrestler and a smart feller. And so there were times before shows and stuff like that where we had, 4 hours of an afternoon like sitting on our fucking thumbs. So we would end up down at the ring while people are going on with matches and stuff like that. And people who weren't doing other stuff, we'd roll around, we'd act like fools. Like Eric Young and I used to sell out the front row while we did a skit of Stu Hart versus Andre the Giant.
I promise I'll only ask for that one when we're done recording.
I'll give you the biggest high spot. So we built this feud up for months at one point. It was awesome because every once in a while I was kind of promo on Andre, and you would cut the promo on Stu, and the office got wind of it. And one day we decided to do like a pay-per-view pre-show match strictly for the boys. Stu versus Andre. And one of the best parts of that, I can't remember. I think we were still in Florida for this one, but we did entrances. And each one of our entrances took long enough for like 3 or 4 other people to pass us and go on with a match. We come back and we're still coming down the ramp, and another match has gone on and they've gone to the back. And then the third match is going on when we've reached the stairs, kind of thing. We're in this race. And
I'm just sitting here picturing Eric Young in like the Andre singlet riding a motor scooter to the ring.
There was some gold there. We had some fun with that.
Oh man, I'm glad, because admittedly, you've done great with TNA, but there have been a lot of great podcasts you've done asking on that end of things. So I'm going to avert from that for the most part, but I did have to ask about Team Canada, based in Edmonton. Like you said, nobody's flying me down to do the Nashville podcast yet. So I'm asking on Team Canada. Okay. How different was it for you though, to be working with individuals like Ted and individuals you had worked with a little bit before versus working with Bobby and Eric, who you obviously have a great relationship with, but by your own admission, you hadn't met until TNA?
Well, so Ted and Jack I was extensively familiar with. It was Petey that I knew nothing about. Petey and I got along fine. Petey's a good dude. Jack is a good dude, but likes to party and is like, Jack's an awesome cat and I love him. But at that time, he and Ted were thick as thieves. And Ted, love him to death, had all kinds of weird shit going on. And he getting into a fist fight with CM Punk in the parking lot of the White Trash Cafe. puts that exclamation point on his presence wherever he is, right? However he does it, Ted is Ted. And now Ted is a polarizing individual who, people either love him or hate him. I get along great with Ted, but at the same time, like, I certainly wouldn't want to do damage control or any of that kind of stuff for him.
It'd be hard to be his PR guy.
Yeah,
really big shoes.
Seriously, like and I'll go to my grave saying Ted Hart, TJ Wilson, and Harry Smith were the most talented in-ring performers I ever saw perform. And you can pick any era, any wrestler of any cut, jib, or whatever. Those kids could throw the most believable punches you've ever seen at 800 miles an hour. And Ted is the only person who have ever fooled me, not once, but twice, when breaking kayfabe and made me break kayfabe. And like, after the second one, I was like, okay, you're like, bro, you'll be on fire. And I'll be like, yeah. All right. Hit me up when you're done. When you're done.
Say, like, looking around.
I'm never going to believe that again. Like, legit 2 matches. He had me thinking that he blinded himself in one. And like, just anyway. So the changeover from Ted to the very, very, very calm and quiet, easy to get along with Bobby Roode, and the fun and gravelly and exciting Eric Young. It was a very easy transition to work with those guys because they were consummate professionals and very good at their craft. And as you can see by their now, positions in the business, they're exactly where they should be.
Continued to do great things on top of doing other great things. Right now, I know that I've got a ton more to ask you on my end of things, man, but like I was telling you before, I'd rather do a million shorter interviews with you so everybody can tune into them at every opportunity. However, I have to ask because we're coming out, the world's getting a little bit more to normal, you're wrestling a little bit more, you're training a little bit more. Might not be as much of a need, but you're a broadcasting student. You've got a broadcasting degree. Is there ever the consideration of the Johnny Devine cast or something along those lines?
My own podcast and stuff like that? Absolutely possible. Working for the media? Never.
I'll have you on a lot of guest spots, but you'll never work for Love Wrestling is what I'm getting here. There's the scoop I'm going to send out. Johnny Devine shoots hard on Love Wrestling. Let me tell you, that'll get some clicks in Alberta.
Can't take it.
And let me tell you, man, I can't blame you, but how can I when you're doing so many great things in the sphere of professional wrestling, inside the ring training, inside the ring wrestling, and hopefully coming to a town near you sooner rather than later. But friends, if you want to keep up to the latest and greatest that Johnny Devine is doing, where can we find you, friend?
We can always go on Facebook. Johnny Devine is, of course, presence there. Canadian Strong Style Wrestling Academy is there on Facebook as well. Instagram, CDN Silver Badger, Canadian Silver Badger there, as well as on Twitter, CDN Silver Badger. And that is I.
It is highly recommended, friends. Obviously, I've only just met you for the first time, but you're a great individual, and I can certainly, friend, speak to the great work that you do as a professional wrestler. If you've got the opportunity to check out Can-Am, the CWE, any of the upcoming bookings in BC, Alberta, throughout Western Canada, and hopefully coming out to the United States and beyond sooner rather than later, I would recommend it. Support good people, support great professional wrestling, support your local Indian. If Johnny Devine's there, friend, you're doing all three. Once again, thank you for tuning into Love Wrestling. Follow us where videos are viewed or audio is listened to at Love Wrestling CA, and continue to stay up to date with the latest and greatest from the Canadian pro wrestling scene. For Johnny, I'm Spencer. Thank you for tuning in. We'll talk to you on the next one, friends.